Grüezi ragazzi, bienvenue e welcome to Cannabis Scienzia's LinkedIn Live for this week. We are very, very grateful for each and every one of you that has decided to join us today. And to anybody that's going to be checking out the recording at a later date, thank you very much for giving us a look. Before we get started today, just a little bit of an intro about Cannabis Sciencia. We are a education and science company that focuses on the education of healthcare professionals around the world, and in doing so, doing our part to increase access to medical cannabis for patients around the world. Our primary service that we offer is accredited education. And here you see a little bit of an overview of what that process looks like when we work with partners to develop accredited education, whether that's CME in countries like Germany and Switzerland or CPD in the UK. Accredited education, we believe, is the key to helping grow the market and drive adoption, especially for companies who are looking to carve out a niche for themselves, because it really kills multiple birds with one stone in, driving brand awareness, building reputation, helping to lay the foundation to build lasting relationships with your physicians. And last but not least, also being the source of data, helping companies to develop their internal proprietary database of healthcare professionals in their relevant markets. We also recently just launched our Principles of Clinical Cannabinology handbook. This is about a 600, 700 page monstrosity of a resource that Viola and Fabio, my esteemed colleagues at Cannabis Sciencia, co-authored. I think I think this has been in the work for 5, 6, 7 years, and it covers everything from the endocannabinoid system to therapeutic applications. I think we have over 30 indications listed that include also different case studies from different doctors across Europe. So if you'd like to learn more about our book, please feel free to scan the QR code. Other services that we provide also include things like observational study design and management, clinical trials. And here you also have my contact information and the model that we live by, which is through education, we increase adoption. Through increased adoption, we increase access. And through increased access, we ultimately help more patients. So without further ado, I'm very excited to have our fellow education warrior with us today, fighting in the same corner as us, this good fight. And I would like to welcome Trenton Birch of Chiba, Africa, to our live today. Trenton, first of all, it's been a pleasure connecting with you around the world, frankly, over the last few months. And thank you very much for taking the time. And we are going to be discussing cannabis education and developments in Africa, as well as something that I know you are very passionate about, Trenton, which is the role of sustainability in our industry. So a quick thank you to everybody that's saying hello. Hello to everybody back, wherever in the world you are. And without further ado, Trenton, if I may please ask you to give our audience a little bit of an intro about yourself and what Chiba Africa is about, and let's get the ball rolling.
Thanks, Bijan, for that warm introduction. Viola, nice to see you. My name is Trenton Birch. I head up a company called Chiba Africa. We are based in Johannesburg, South Africa, and we run an academy, a physical academy that we have in Johannesburg. We run a training company dealing with a sort of different sector. We also run a consultancy and have been very sort of involved in developing and trying to bring this industry online. We are purpose-driven entrepreneurs. I always tell people I can't sell ice to Eskimos because that would make me dishonest. We really believe in the opportunity that cannabis and hemp have to have a seismic impact on our planet and on our people's population, especially for South Africa. And African and developing countries. I often say that internationals, in the Northern Hemisphere, need cannabis for medicine and cannabis to get high. Here we need it for those two things, but also to eat. So we've obviously got a huge legacy in terms of cannabis. We're already known as a cannabis country globally, and we have great conditions, great landrace strains, have been exporting tons of cannabis into Europe, obviously illegally, for the last 50, 60 years. And trying to bring this industry online. I mean, I think everybody in this industry needs to take some responsibility to capacitate and bring it online. It's a collective effort. So that's very much our ethos and how we drive things forward.
Thank you very much, Trenton. Viola, would you like to take it away?
Yeah, I'm gonna take it away. Thanks a lot for the introduction, and thank you, Trenton, for being here. Since we don't have a lot of time, but we have a lot of curiosity, I'm gonna just enter straight away in some of today's topics. Actually, asking you, since you gave us a little bit about the topic on landscape of cannabis or medical cannabis. What's that across Africa? I know you're based in South Africa, but the question that perhaps many of the viewers today have is what's the landscape like? Is it different country to country, like it is in Europe, or is more comparable to what's going on in the United States at the moment? Is there different regulations between medical and rec? What about hemp? Since today we want to touch on sustainability, I think this is an important topic. So try not to use all the half an hour with this reply, because then I have quite a lot of other questions.
Yes. I'll keep it brief. So just briefly on the Africa conversation, I mean, what a lot of people often don't realize is that Africa is actually a continent with lots of different countries, all with different nuances and languages and etc. So often people talk about Africa as one country, but it's completely different wherever you go. South Africa is definitely at the forefront of the cannabis industry at the moment. There are certain countries that have brought stuff online, like Malawi, Zimbabwe, a few countries in the middle as well. Rwanda, I think, and Uganda have also been bubbling, and Ghana. But Zimbabwe and Malawi are probably the most advanced apart from us. And essentially, the challenge with Africa at the moment, and Prohibition Partners highlighted this a few months ago, that one of the problems with our industry is we have set it up for export. So, initially, if you were to get a license from our regulator, you had to have an offtake. There was no way of distributing medical cannabis locally. That now can be done through what's called a Section 21, which is a whole lot of paperwork you have to do through a doctor, and now can be prescribed, but our patient numbers are very, very low and moving very, very slowly. So that is a challenge in Africa, to set up a local market which has its focus on export and not actually providing medicine for local people. I think is a big problem. But overall, Africa is definitely coming online. I mean, we have a massive agricultural industry here. At one point, Zimbabwe was one of the breadbaskets of fruit and vegetables into the north. We export large volumes of agricultural products across the world. So we're certainly in a good place. And plus, we obviously have a lot of cannabis experience, which helps. And it's just it's an interesting space, because we have, hemp is still cannabis, which a lot of people get confused about. It's just the application and the level of THC, which also is an issue, but let's unpack that later. But essentially, we have, I think it's 88 or 89 medical licenses out here. They're not all operating. I think it's 10 or less are actually exporting at the moment. A lot of guys are finding their feet. Then we have about 378 hemp licenses out. Those have been out for 2 years. The first year, the licenses came out late, so we didn't plant anything. Last year, we had a seed crisis, so we had no seeds. So again, we didn't plant anything. But this year, we're really confident that we're going to get some plants in the ground. Obviously, we need to figure out the whole industrialization of this industry, because if we don't, we can't just grow plants without industrializing, and that comes with a whole bunch of other sort of nuances. But essentially, there's a lot of people working in this industry who are very passionate about it, very driven to make it happen. And there's no doubt about it that South Africa specifically, and I think some other African countries, are very poised, if we play our cards right, to become global players, without a doubt.
Definitely.
I'd like to just follow that up, Viola, if I may. But is cannabis as stigmatized across Africa as it is in Europe as well? Or is it different within the different countries? Like, could you perhaps comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's different in different countries. I mean, generally, there is still a lot of stigma around cannabis. Obviously, as we get more educated, we realize that all of that is, complete lies, and we were brainwashed. We find that the irony is if you look in many traditional African cultures, they've been using cannabis kind of informally and unofficially for decades. Many of the gogos, the kind of grandmothers and in South Africa have been using it in tea, which is obviously, a milder way of consuming cannabis. So it's more of a relaxant. It's good for all kinds of things. So even though it's been used in communities widely for decades, there is still that stigma attached. There's a different stigma attached to sort of smoking a joint than there is to having it in some tea, which is more used for medicinal reasons. So it's a very deep part of our culture. But the sort of rec side, or the responsible adult use side, has definitely has made progress because people are starting to understand that this plant is something that has many benefits, even on a recreational level. So it is changing, and each country is different. There are certain countries in Africa that are very Muslim-led, and in Muslim communities that generally are a bit more restrictive. If you've got fundamental Christian groups across the country, we find those two groups can be quite anti-cannabis. But it really does depend on the territory, But Africa is actually, in terms of users, if memory serves me correctly, prohibition partners at one point, the African continent was the highest users of cannabis in the world. So we definitely love our weed. We just need to sort of industrialize and bring it into the mainstream.
Do you think that these that you just mentioned, actually, so the traditional use of cannabis, and so widespread traditional use, has a role playing in this dichotomy, in a sense, in which it's the continent that is doing so much effort into export, but then perhaps not so much effort into allowing the population to benefit from it, both from a medical but also an industrial point of view? Do you think this has anything to do, or is any other reason? Like, why are we having this conversation? Why the conversation is not starting from a reintroduction of roots, basically, because that's what we're talking about, medical roots at the end, and just reallowing, basically, for something that was part of the continent to be out there and to be official, in a sense.
Completely. I mean, Interpol reckon that a third of cannabis hauls over the past however many decades in Europe can be traced back to South Africa. So, and we're talking about a lot of people from the rural areas, especially an area called the Eastern Cape, specifically a region called Pondoland, where people have been growing cannabis to send their kids to school and put food on the table. They haven't been getting rich from it. They've been sustaining their lives. We are very different in the sense that cannabis is very politicized here. It's very racialized, very similar to sort of South America and some of the challenges in the USA. It doesn't just sit in this isolated space. And we have a dichotomy here, a very complex dichotomy, where we have all these SAPRA, which is our regulator, licensed farms allowed to operate and grow and cultivate cannabis. But all of these farmers that have put ourselves on the map and have been persecuted and have crop spraying, et cetera, are still criminals. And that is a big challenge and something we're very outspoken about. It's a travesty that we have cannabis cultivators who are legacy cultivators for decades, are still considered criminals, and the government has failed to deal with that, completely failed to deal with that. There is a strong narrative around it, but we're sort of 4 years into our first step into the space when a private purposes bill was put on the table, and we were allowed to consume and cultivate cannabis at home. So in 4 years, it's been a pretty appalling pace. However, the flip side is, 2 weeks ago, I was invited to take part in a government pakisa, which means hurry up in a local language called Sesotho. And essentially, the whole thing was, there were a handful of us from industry, and then there were people from government, from different departments, and Deloitte captured everything. And literally for 5 days, we were in these rooms, just unpacking the industry and figuring out a way forward. And we came away feeling very optimistic, very positive. We need to see those things transpire, into legislation. I am acutely aware, especially with the international travel that I do, that, one of the things that this industry can do is feed our people. And the only way to do that is for us to be exporting, and dealing with the international market. And I think that this Pakisa hopefully will open that up. So it is a complex space and a space we're trying to navigate, but the conversation is often around how we benefit people on the ground, how we make sure we drive job creation, small, medium enterprise development. Those things are key to our economy. So there's a level of frustration from the industry because sunrise industries are needed more than ever before, especially in developing economies. But we are driving and lobbying and persuading and I was going to say the word beating, but shaking government to see it. But there's not a government official that doesn't talk about cannabis at the moment. It's a big topic. We just need action.
Thank you. And I think you already replied one of the questions I actually wanted to do, which was what type of groups you are educating. And you just gave away that actually there is a lot of efforts on your side, not just on who is operational on the field, but also really who is the decision maker, which is so fundamental to be reshaping the brain of. So thank you for the job you're doing. I guess if you want to give us a little brainstorm on how your education program work, I would really appreciate that, because it could help as well understanding how you're supporting the creation of basically all of these new jobs.
So I have quite a strong background in marketing and used to work in the music industry with a lot of clients, and I'd often ask them what's their target market, and they would go like, oh, it's everybody, and I'd be like, well, it can't be everybody, and we get this question all the time, like who are our clients, who are our students. And for the first time in my life, I have to say everybody. We in our physical classes on campus, we've had the biggest diverse age group we've had. We had an 18-year-old and a 75-year-old in the same class. This is on a full-time 12-week course. We've had 18 and 55-year-olds. We have people from different race. We have male, female, from completely different backgrounds. And through this journey, I've realized that I don't believe there will be a person on this planet that doesn't intersect in some way with cannabis at some point, whether it's the dashboard in the car you're driving, or the shampoo bottle that's made out of hemp, or the food you eat, or the medicine, or the recreation. I believe it will touch every single person. So we have to look at the market and see where it's going. Right now we have a 12-week course on campus which covers all sort of medical content. It covers grow content. It covers sustainability and wellness, as well as cannabis business. And in our sustainability and wellness, we teach permaculture, food security, mindfulness. We do a whole lot of other things because we believe that education should be holistic. But then we do short courses. So we do 3-day courses specifically focused on commercial cannabis cultivation. So how you bring on a commercial farm, all the technicalities of that, SOPs, GMP, GACP, all of those things get covered. We recently launched a hempcrete building course, which is accredited for CPD points, where people learn to make hemp bricks and to plaster with hemp. We have a cannabis and hemp course, a cannabis and tourism course coming out. There's all kinds of courses we're adding as we look where the market is growing. And I think it's very important for education to be as adaptable as possible, especially in the world we live in with AI, knocking down our door. We need to be able to learn in dexterous, rapid situations. And so, we were accredited with various different bodies in South Africa. We are busy with 1-year programs, 3-year programs. But it's important to be dexterous in that content. And I think so the audience is very broad, especially in South Africa, where we have a large class of people who are, sort of lower income level, a lot of unemployment. So when we teach, in those communities, we have to teach in a very different way than we would teach, a lawyer or a big agri guy. So it changes. We've got to be quite dynamic in our delivery.
Trenton, you mentioned, first of all, I want to give a shout out to our audience, because I'm keeping an eye on the comments, and I think we have people all the way from Toronto to South Africa, Germany. So shout out to everybody that's tuned in right now. I think this is probably one of the most international audiences that we've had. So if anybody's watching, drop a line. I'm curious to see where you're watching from. I'm in Germany myself. And shout out to Mark Davis from Toronto. But Trenton, I wanted to ask you something, because you touched on some of the kind of consumer goods that are available in South Africa at the moment with hemp and CBD. I spent some time working in this sector also, like CBD, hemp, consumer packaged goods, and South Africa was always a market that we had on our radar as well. What is that like in South Africa? Do you see a lot of hemp and CBD products, and what has the acceptance been like? Just to quickly comment about what it's been like here in Germany, we see more and more products coming out. Just today, I saw that one of the biggest like processed meat companies out there, like sliced meat companies out there, Rügenwalder Mühle or something like that. Any of my German people in the audience may get mad at me for butchering it, but one of the biggest companies, they just released. Yeah, yeah, good point. But they just brought out a plant-based sliced chicken with hemp protein, actually. And this is, if you just look at some of the big companies that are now incorporating CBD and hemp components, it's growing. So what's that like in South Africa?
So, I mean, you know, up until recently, we've had to import hemp. So there's a company here called Emporium who make all kinds of products out of hemp, but they've been importing it from China. So we still have to capacitate the actual production of hemp on the ground. And then there's obviously the processing side. You know, we're talking fabric, we're talking decorticating machines and plants. So to industrialize is going to take some sizable capital. We don't have the same CBD culture that I've seen in Germany. You know, I remember going to Mary Jane last year and walking in, and there was bags of weed everywhere. And I very quickly realized that it was all CBD. So there's a massive sort of CBD smokable market in Europe. And obviously the CBD market from a health and wellness perspective is huge. The problem we've had here is our regulator. They have put completely farcical quantums onto your dosing. So you cannot have more than 20 milligrams in a dose and 600 milligrams in a packet. Now, if you speak to any doctor, and I know you guys will know this, you know, depending on your body weight, et cetera, but, you know, you need 70 plus milligrams a day to really have any impact. So if you're spending, you know, 20, 30 euros on one bottle and it's lasting you 5-6 days, it's costing you a fortune. So there's a lot of faith has been lost in CBD in South Africa and in the States. You know, we all know the CBD market crashed in the States because I think the cost was just too high. I think as we start to produce locally and grow locally, the cost will come down, the audience will widen because of the reduced cost, and then I see great value for sort of CBD medicinal hemp. We obviously have lots of land here. You know, I mean, there are 200 million hectares of uncultivated land in Africa that are totally arable and ready for cultivation. So we have, we can become a breadbasket. We can facilitate growing cannabis or hemp on a large scale. And then we've got to capacitate the industry. So as much as we've got to teach the general consumer that when they go and buy, you know, a hemp piece of meat or protein bar, that it's not going to get them high. But what we're trying to do at the moment is lobby some of the big companies, lobby government to make military uniforms out of hemp, lobby the paper companies to switch to hemp. These big industries we need, they've got the purchasing power. So we're trying to catalyze every part of the supply chain at the moment and work with people who are, you know, bringing in sort of hemp cultivation facilities, and then we provide training, help capacitate, help provide seeds. If we just operate in isolation, this industry will never take off. So there's huge potential for hemp in this country without a shadow of a doubt.
I want to touch on this because we have not so many minutes actually, and I would love to bring the topic of the conversation back exactly on this topic, on the topic of sustainability, the role of hemp or cannabis for industrial purposes, and in my opinion, the potentially difficult situation that perhaps Africa has on one side, if basing the economy is a lot about exporting, for example, to Europe, then we're talking about a pretty unsustainable practice like indoor growing. And on the other side, as you just said now, with these amazing classes on hempcrete and literally how to feed, clothe, and put a roof over your head with this plant. These, on the other hand, could really be like the pioneering continent for showing us all how it can be done, how it can give us back autarky in a sense. So I would love perhaps if we can take a little bit of time. And I see we have a pretty active audience today. And if you want to chip in your thoughts and comments on this, I think it's a really nice conversation, because as Trenton is saying, and I couldn't agree more, this is done by us. I mean, we are the industry. So if we don't think about this stuff, then we're going to do it wrong. So we need to keep questioning ourselves on how we're doing it.
Completely. I mean, I think obviously first prize for us is to be cultivating hemp and processing, so that we're exporting processed goods as opposed to raw materials, which is obviously the historical way of doing it through colonization, and we need to build that out. We have a lot of what we call them RDP housing here, which are sort of low cost housing for our poorer communities. Those can be made out of hemp bricks, which are breathable, mold resistant, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a fantastic opportunity for applications of hemp on the ground here. But it takes an industry to bring those online. The other challenge is, in terms of sustainability, is we can grow very, very good cannabis outdoor, whether it's under the sun, under netting, or under hybrid tunnels. And this is something I brought up in Berlin last week. The Colombians are exporting medical cannabis into Australia and Germany, growing it at 6 cents a gram. We can grow pretty much the same if we're growing outdoor. So, and growing indoor is just not sustainable in the north. So I'm really hoping to see a transition, and I believe there is a space for indoor in terms of heavy pharmaceutical production, but I think there's going to be a real big market for purchasing outdoor cannabis, and eventually I see in the next 12 to 24 months there will be a price war in the market between developing countries that can grow outdoor and developed countries indoor. So we're certainly trying to back that. Obviously, we have our interests at heart. I know that I was quite disappointed that the German cannabis club market is going to insist that cannabis is grown locally. I understand that from a club ecosphere perspective, but when you're talking about the price point being so dramatic, it's not going to help the underground market, which is still going to flourish. So the sooner we can see those things opening up, I know Canada has become completely protectionist. Same with America. You can't export cannabis into America or Canada. I think it's about partnerships. We have a legacy with Europe. We've been working with Europe for decades. We're a lot more closely aligned, I think, geographically. So I think there's a lot of potential to work with Europe to create sustainable sort of solutions for all of us.
Thank you. Actually, you just mentioned you just got back from your recent trip in Germany. So perhaps any take, any feedback on your way back in South Africa from this recent trip in Europe? And
I mean, first of all, it's fantastic for me to have to travel so far and have 4 events in 1 week. That's amazing. I met some incredible people. The things that were missing for me, there was no talk on sustainability anywhere. There was no talk on hemp. I saw a few hemp stalls at Mary Jane, but otherwise there was completely no conversation. I realized that us living in Africa and living with the rawness of poverty on our doorstep, maybe we're a bit more open to it. I also found that, and this is just to be completely honest, that the lack of female representation across all the events I went to, and also the lack of people of color. This is a global mixed industry. And I found that, I appreciate it's Europe and not everyone can travel. I would like to see more countries represented, more people of color, and more females. This is an industry that is new, and we have the opportunity to set the pace. And let's not forget, this is cannabis. It's a beautiful plant that's been given to us by whoever you believe it's been given to us by. We should embrace its essence at all points. We should make sure that as many people can benefit as possible from it. And I think that narrative needs to be driven very hard by business leaders in this industry. I had a good time, but those things were definitely missing for me.
I'd like to just follow up on that. Actually, Trenton, you're right. When you look at the crowds, they are quite homogenous. And I'm going to take this opportunity to give a shout out to one really awesome woman doing some great stuff in the industry, my colleague Viola. So Viola, just want to give you your roses here as Trenton makes it. Exactly. Viola is not the first or only woman that I've had, the woman leader that I've had to female leader that I've had the the pleasure of working with in this industry, and I agree with you, Trenton. We need to have more diversity. You see this surely in Africa and the U.S. This is also something that is being strived for, and to give equal opportunity to maybe also marginalized communities in society. And I'm totally with you on that. Unfortunately, we have now reached the end of our live already. Again, as always, I feel like we could be sitting here for another half hour or hours easily. And on that note, just one more shout out to everybody in the comments, everybody that's tuned in. A big thank you to all of you. You are the fuel that motivates us to do this every week. So thank you very much. Trenton, also a big thank you to you after just arriving back home, and surely it being a hectic week. We appreciate you taking the time. And on that note, everybody, thank you very much. Und bis zum nächsten Mal.
Really appreciate it.
And check out Chiba's courses, since I see some comments as well of people are really appreciating those. So please go ahead and support. We definitely support education and all the work Trenton has been doing, and hopefully synergizing with him on this side of the world, because education definitely does not have any border. So yeah, and Trenton, I thank you, Bijan, by the way. That was unexpected and very beautiful. But I couldn't agree with you more. And I believe actually the lack of topic on focus on sustainability is a symptom of the fact that there isn't so much diversity. This is my take, actually. Yeah.
That's a good point. Don't worry, I'm going to bring some Africans next year. You're going to come
Very
on
good. I think that we in Europe and the rest of the world can learn a lot when it comes to sustainability and incorporating it into our operations in the cannabis industry from our colleagues in Africa. So we look forward to it. You have friends with us, Trenton, so whenever you want to, spread the word, and you let us know. And again, big thank you to everybody. Sorry, go ahead.
Bijan, can I steal another minute to Trenton and perhaps give a last question to Trenton from someone in the audience that I think brought an interesting point. Greetings from Italy. In December 2020, the World Health Organization recommended that cannabis and its related substances be removed from Schedule 4 on the 1961 single convention, essentially removing international barriers to legalizing cannabis for medical and scientific purposes. How were African countries aligned in that vote, and how could this recommendation from the WHO impact the growth of the cannabis industry and sustainable cannabis forming practices in Africa going forward? Of course, we don't have a lot of time, but if you want to comment on this, I thought it was cool.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and without taking too much time, I don't know what each African country was in terms of its positioning. I do know that our medical regulator, used this as an excuse all the time. But there are lots of countries around the world, Canada being one, who have just gone ahead and done what they wanted to do. So any country that's using the WHO as an excuse for bringing cannabis online, I think is misguided. At the end of the day, this is coming online whether anybody likes it or not. So it is something we do need to consider. But that, for me, that's an old argument. It just has no weight anymore if we look what's happening around the world. So that's a very quick answer to the question.
Thank you very much, Trenton. And we'll be again online next Tuesday. Thanks a lot. Bye, everyone.
Great, guys. Good night. Bye-bye.